time we had proper border security. We're the laughing stock of the world.
The president calling out Democrats as the clock ticks towards the funding deadline.
I have no red line, unlike President Obama. I just want great border security.
As a Border Patrol agent, I would support shutting down the government if, in fact, it was going to lead to border security.
The president's legal team says it is highly unlikely the president will sit for a voluntary interview with Mueller.
You don't just get to interview the president because you think it would be interesting.
There are new clues in the search for a missing college student who went out for a jog 12 days ago and has not been seen since.
I would certainly meet with Iran if they wanted to meet. I don't know that they're ready yet. They're having a hard time right now.
Iran has shown little interest in meeting with President Trump or in changing its behavior.
20-year-old college graduate who, instead of asking for a handout when he hit hard times, he was actually handing out his resumes.
We stayed up all night long, made our drinks too strong, feeling 10 feet tall, rope swinging to the water in the middle.
A little too early to be talking about the drinks that were too strong.
Well, or you could be feeling it.
Right, unless you're talking about what you had last night for Sally's birthday.
Oh, yeah, we did celebrate.
Yes, I saw the pictures online.
I know.
Yeah.
Mrs. Juicy made a beautiful coconut.
It had like
white
layers
cake.
with
Yeah.
the white icing, and she was holding up with the big 25 on the back. To be 25, Ken, remember that?
Goodness.
No, the scary part is I'm a guy with a 25-year-old daughter. And she's the young one.
I know.
Anyway, thank you very much for joining us today. Pete is in for Brian.
Thanks,
Brian
Robbie.
will be back tomorrow.
Every night is a reason to celebrate, in my opinion.
This is true.
You know,
I
you
agree.
live in Trump's America. Life is good.
Listen to you.
You sound like Kim Kardashian. We'll get to that.
Oh,
She was
we
on
will
Jimmy
get to
Kimmel.
that. That's right.
All right. Meanwhile, let's talk a little bit about something in the news. The president has been tweeting, and he makes it very clear. Immigration is something people really care about, and he is willing to put this as one of the primary issues before American voters as we head to the midterms.
Yeah, this was his tweet, his latest tweet about this. Illegal immigration is a top national security problem, he says. After decades of playing games with the whole world laughing at the stupidity of our immigration laws, and with Democrats thinking that open borders, large-scale crime, and abolishing ICE is good for them, we must get smart and finally do what must be done for the safety and security of our country.
That's right. I mean, think about the context of that yesterday as well. The president meeting with the prime minister of Italy, who has seen firsthand that if you don't get your arms around the migrant crisis and refugee crisis, it is a national security issue for your country. Open borders is a dumb policy.
Right.
If you don't address it, you're going to have not just, oh, who's here, who's not here, but serious crime and serious national security issues.
Yesterday, we were talking about how the president is willing to risk a government shutdown before the midterms just to get Congress to do something. Remember when he signed that omnibus bill back in March, he said, I'm not going to sign another one of these great big funding bills that doesn't have my money for the wall. Yep. Well, nothing really on Capitol Hill has anything close to the $25 billion he would need. There's a story this morning in the Wall Street Journal that apparently the president is now agreeing with Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan that he will not force a government shutdown before the midterm elections. They're going to pick it up in November or December. But nonetheless, it sounds like what they're going to do is they're going to pass the spending bills they can. And then with the contentious stuff, they're going to pass a patch that will temporarily fund the government through the midterms. And then after that, they're going to pick up the wall.
Well, the president, he's been...
Typical Washington.
I'm just saying, like a patch. Let's call it something new. I call it kicking the can forever.
A Band-Aid on the problem,
yes.
right? Well, the president, you know, he doesn't care what anyone thinks. He says what is on his mind. He said, he's doubled down, tripled down on this shutdown. We will shut down the government if we don't get what we want, because he is keeping in mind who went to the polls to vote for him and how he got in office.
That's right.
He campaigned on this, and Rush Limbaugh reminds everyone of that when he says this.
Trump is showing he's not afraid of a government shutdown, which, believe me, the base of this party loves. The base of the Republican Party. We know now, by the way, when any poll that shows Trump has 85 to 92% support in the Republican Party, the Republican base is Trump's now. It's not a bunch of populist nationalists. It's the mainstream of the Republican Party that's for Trump. And they hate this cowering before the Democrats and the media over government shutdowns. They hate giving up every policy idea in the face of the blackmail of government shutdown. So they love Trump saying he'd be willing to do it over this, because the issue of immigration is what got him elected.
And it will be one of the top issues going into the midterms. Keep in mind, while the president is very strong on our national security, says the Democrats, many of them are for open borders. He also reminds them a number of very prominent Democrats have said in the last month or two, get rid of ICE.
Yeah.
And where would we be without ICE?
And we want open borders. I mean, the great point.
We do?
Well, that's what they say they want. Yeah. Not a bunch of populist nationalists, mainstream Republicans. If you support the border, you're just supporting our country. That's what the Republican Party stands for. Today, it's a great message to run on. It's also a message worth having a showdown, whether it's a shutdown or not, showdown with the status quo. For that priority.
Well, how about those numbers? Rush said 85 to 92% support the Republican Party, and support in the Republican Party, the base supports President Trump. You want to know why the president is so strict about immigration and wanting that wall? If you look at the murder rate in Mexico, it went up dramatically in 2017. Last year, it went up 27%. 31,174 people were murdered.
That's higher than the height of the drug wars that happened in early 2011, 2012 over there. And you look at Mexico has 200 million less people than America, yet the number of people murdered in that country is roughly twice ours. Got a serious crime drug problem run by cartels just on our southern border.
Absolutely.
And we're wondering whether we should secure it or not?
Yeah, no kidding. Well, one of the agencies inside the United States that is tasked with trying to get rid of the criminal alien element here in the United States is ICE, right? Keep in mind, ICE agents are federal law enforcement agents, right? Okay, so we've been telling you about how out in Portland there have been the Occupy ICE protests for over a month. A lot of the people were Antifa, it is described. The violence was occasional out there. It was a problem. And now we're learning that at least twice, people inside the ICE building, federal employees called because of they were fearing for their own personal safety, and the cops in Portland, at the direction of the police chief and the mayor, would not come to help them.
That is unbelievable. 2 times they called 911. Their tax dollars go to fund us. They needed help, and no one came because the police were told to stand down. One of these guys was trying to pull out in his car, in his vehicle, to try to get through the crowd. The crowd, he said, harassed him. He called police. Police didn't come. He was trying to go pick up his daughter from camp. And then he says that they showed up at his apartment building.
This is after they...
Not police. I'm talking about protesters.
Oh, this is a report. Some employees, as you said, even denied police assistance after they left the ICE building, including one man who's a disabled Marine veteran who was followed and confronted as he went to pick up his daughter from her day camp. So this guy calls 911, and the equal protection of the 14th Amendment of our laws, nope, doesn't apply to you because you live in Portland where we support the protesters and not law enforcement.
The union that represents ICE, they're furious about this. They mailed the mayor a cease and desist letter. They said it is in violation of the U.S. Constitution under the 14th Amendment, which says the government cannot deny any person's protection.
Also, part of the cease and desist letter says we fail to see why targeting the employees of ICE and leaving them vulnerable to violence, harassment, and even death furthers a legitimate government interest. Your policy has created a zone of terror and lawlessness.
So they want to protect the illegals, but they don't want to protect the people who live here.
Clearly, the people in power in Portland don't like this president's policies regarding immigration. But do they like the national policies of keeping people safe? Federal employees were at peril because the mayor and the police chief have a beef with Donald Trump's immigration policy.
We fired up about this. Send us your emails. Let us know what you think. friends@foxnews.com.
Imagine if you called the cops and they said, what do you do for a living? Maybe we're not going to pick you up.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Meanwhile, if you were watching late night television last night, Jimmy Kimmel had Kim Kardashian with him. And...
with short hair.
There you go.
Fantastic.
You know what?
We notice these things.
Jimmy Kimmel does not like the president. And famously, Kim Kardashian, just about a month or so ago, brought to the president's attention the sentence of Alice Johnson. She was a first-time drug offender, nonviolent, serving life in prison. Kim Kardashian had heard about it on Twitter. She told the president about it. He commuted the sentence. She sat down last night with Jimmy. He wanted her to say something about the president. Would she? Watch this.
I walk in, and I'm like, I look around, and I'm kind of starstruck from the Oval Office, and the first thing I say in our meeting, I say, holy we're in the Oval Office. That's what I said to him. That was the first thing I said. And I had to take a moment to be like, wait, we're really here. I'm very grateful, and I'm very hopeful that more good things are going to come out of our conversations.
Do you have a list now of people that you might ask him to release from prison?
I do. I've been working on it.
Is Melania on it? I know that you're not necessarily a Trump supporter. I know your husband, Kanye, seems to like him.
I always respect what other person thinks. I have nothing bad to say about the president. You know,
right,
he's done something amazing.
You know, if you boycott and you won't go to the White House and you won't have a conversation, then you can't get anything done. But good on her for having a priority and being willing to sit with the president.
He tried for 7 minutes to get her to say something not fond of the president. She did say of Kanye, he likes the president's personality and how when he became president, everybody underestimated him.
Well, good for him for having her on, knowing that she supports the president, and we can have civil conversations. You don't have to agree. And she handled herself beautifully.
It was very civil.
Yeah,
all right.
That's right.
Thought we'd bring you the highlights.
And she looked fantastic. How about her skin? She's a pretty skin, Jillian.
That's definitely top of the list of what you noticed. Yes, her skin. She's so pretty. Good morning. Let's get you caught up on your news right now. Today, family and friends will say final goodbyes to a Washington state officer killed in the line of duty. A memorial service will be held today for Kent police officer Diego Moreno. He was accidentally hit by another officer's car while chasing a suspect. A 16-year-old now charged with second-degree murder. The 8-year veteran of the force leaves behind a wife and 2 young children. To donate to his family's GoFundMe page, you can visit our website, foxandfriends.com. The U.S. military now ramping up efforts to battle the massive wildfires ripping through California. National Guardsmen using helicopters and planes to fight the flames from above. The car fire burning in Northern California is now the 7th most destructive fire in state history. It's blamed for 6 deaths, including 2 firefighters, a grandmother, and her great-grandchildren. More than a dozen wildfires are burning across California. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, the first Democrat to meet with Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, calling his sit-down productive. Manchin was one of 3 Democrats who voted to confirm President Trump's first Supreme Court nominee, Neil Gorsuch. If confirmed, Kavanaugh would replace Justice Anthony Kennedy. His final day on the high court is today. That's a look at your headlines. I will send it back to you.
All right, a busy day in the news.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, still ahead on this Tuesday, this college dean forced to apologize for something he said on Twitter. What was so bad? Well, he called a Republican nice.
What?
Plus,
how dare he?
Oh, so terrible. Plus, socialists love this idea from Bernie Sanders.
Medicare for all will be saving middle-class families substantial sums of money.
Guarantee health care to all as a right, not a privilege.
Well, but I bet they won't love the price tag. The numbers on that proposal coming up next.
How high could it be?
Huh. Bernie Sanders and the new Democratic darling, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they have made it crystal clear that they want free health care for all ages.
Health care is a human right and not a privilege.
I campaigned on hard commitments of Medicare for all, tuition-free public college, ensuring a Green New Deal for our future, and championing those issues were the reason that we won.
Okay, so that stuff sounds great, but a new study finds it would cost the country $32.6 trillion over 10 years. Can we afford that? Let's talk to Dr. Mark Siegel. He joins us right now. He's got a great piece on FoxNews.com about this topic.
Actually, Brooke Sigmund has it. Brooke Sigmund has it.
All right, regarding this topic that we're talking about today, $32.6 trillion over 10 years. Can we afford that?
Well, give you an idea what that is, Steve. The short answer is no. We can't even, no way. And here's what it is. We'd have to double all of our income taxes that individuals and corporations pay over 10 years. Double, and we still wouldn't be able to afford it. Wow. That's how expensive $32.6 trillion is. Wow. And why is it so expensive? We're getting rid of the co-pays. We're getting rid of the deductibles. Government pays for everything. This is single payer. This is what Canada has. This is when you wait online. This is when you can't get your hip replacement. You can't get your cardiac stent done. This is where the government rations care. at an enormous expense.
So when they say free health care, it's really not free. We're still paying for it.
Taxpayers are paying for it. I mean, it's absolutely not free. And then the amount that the federal government pays as part of the gross domestic product goes up enormously. Of course we're paying for it. And another thing, Ainsley, whatever happened to the employer-based healthcare system that the Eisenhower years put in? 170 million people get their insurance right now through their employer. Guess what their employer does? They take a tax deduction. They don't pay taxes on it. It's an incentive for jobs.
Sure.
So this thing's a job killer, because if you get rid of that 170 million coverage and there's more choice, more competition, again, no competition here, no choice. So prices will not go down. And again, there's no incentive for getting a job.
Well, doctor, as a doctor, you want to make sure that everybody has health care. Most people here in the United States pay for their own one way or another. But what is the number one thing that concerns you about single payer, which this essentially is, or free health care for everybody?
Steve, you just already said it. As a practicing physician, I like the idea of everybody being covered with catastrophic insurance so that if they went to the emergency room, God forbid, they wouldn't lose their house. But this kind of a thing means the government is there in the doctor's office telling me what to do, rationing care for me. I think that there's already too much of that with big insurance companies. I don't want more government regulations and more government telling me what to do. The beauty of the doctor-patient relationship is that the government is not in the room. The more they're in the room, the less free I am to actually help my patients. Art of medicine would be jeopardized.
Okay, well, while we hear people say, you know, free health care for all, it comes with a big price tag.
Good to see that, because that lets people understand how ridiculous
and
it
at
is.
65, everyone's eligible for Medicare. He just wants, or he and she, they want Medicare for all ages, right? An 18-year-old could be eligible for this.
Absolutely. Ainsley, this is a great point you just made, because 60% of the healthcare dollar is already the government with Medicare or Medicaid. It's already the government way involved.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Siegel.
Good to see you.
Thank you, sir.
Coming up, no terror watch list required. The TSA is tracking regular travelers just fine, or is that over the line? We're going to debate it. Coming up next.
Welcome back. Couple of quick headlines for you, starting with a Fox News alert. ICE claiming responsibility for a deadly attack in Tajikistan that left 2 American cyclists dead. 7 bikers were hit by a car and then attacked with knives and guns on Sunday. 4 people in total were killed. The American victims have not yet been identified. We'll follow that story. And North Korea could be working to build new missiles, despite its pledge to denuclearize. The Washington Post reports U.S. spy agencies are seeing signs that the rogue regime is working on up to 2 missiles capable of hitting the United States. This satellite photo reportedly shows production at a missile facility. Not great. Steve, down to you.
Wonder who at the spy agencies is talking to the Washington Post. Meanwhile, the TSA now defending a surveillance program following some backlash. The Quiet Skies program, as it is called, identifies potentially dangerous travelers and tracks them through airports and once they board airplanes. The question is, does it go too far? Here with a conversation is former special advisor to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security during the Obama administration, David Moore, he's screen left, and former U.S. Army Special Forces conducting counterterrorism operations, Jim Hansen, down in D.C. Jim, David, good morning to you.
Steve, hi.
Jim, why don't you start? Explain how this Quiet Skies program works.
What happens is there are a number of things that can cause an interest in a traveler. Things like going to places, perhaps Syria, and then transiting through Libya. You know, places where we know that there are bad things going on. Then there are additional pieces of intelligence and stuff that create, you know, through an algorithm, an alert on a particular traveler. Then all this program does is it assigns an air marshal to watch them as they transit the airport and as they board and get on the plane, looking for certain behaviors. It's modeled on an Israeli program that is the most successful in the world at preventing hijacking and terrorism. So it's not an intrusion. It's simply being observant of people to see if they're doing things that should trigger an alert.
I had no idea we had air marshals on airplanes watching a single person sometime. How often does this happen, Jim?
They monitor somewhere between a half dozen, maybe 15 people a day. And like I said, the alerts are generated based on previous behaviors and intelligence. And it's not a question of profiling by race or religion or anything else. There are things that are known to be signs. One of the things they're asked to watch for is, does this person perhaps go into the airport with a full beard and come out of the bathroom having shaved it off, which the 9/11 hijackers did, and which ISIS tells people to do. So there are specific signs they're looking for.
Okay, David, what do you think about the Open Skies, Quiet Skies program?
Well, count me as more suspicious than Jim. I think we have to, Steve, get the right balance between national security, which I think ultimately is paramount. Jim and I would agree on that, and civil liberties, the Fourth Amendment, the Bill of Rights, the Privacy Act. We can't necessarily always depend on government to get that balance correct. This thing can be abused. It could save lives. I think we need to know a lot more about it. There's been criticism of it by air marshals from within the system. They say it's taking us in the wrong direction. It's bureaucratic. It's clumsy. There are transparency issues. This thing kind of came out of the blue, and the separation of families issues, the criticism of TSA a year ago for their screening procedures got us really worried about transparency. And the question is, can we get more information about this? And can we get more accountability? Is it working? Has it worked? Has it saved lives? Has it stopped any kind of attack? Who decides what ordinary Americans are? Who makes decisions about whether this is misused?
You said, David, there have been abuses of it. What do you mean?
Well, there could be abuses of it. I didn't say there necessarily was. So the question now is, who's going to decide if there are abuses? Who's going to look into it? I don't necessarily want Congress to come in here to solve all problems, because sometimes that creates more problems. But some kind of accountability, it seems to me, has to be in order here. We all have our suspicions that government agencies can't naturally and always get things right and get this balance between national security and civil liberties correct.
Okay, so Jim, I'll give you the final word. So when the government says trust us, you trust them?
Absolutely not. And that's why we have oversight of agencies. I think I would err on the side of giving them the ability to conduct security operations that can keep us all safe. But like David said, I'm not going to trust them to not abuse it. So let's have good oversight on this. But let's not tell everybody what we're doing and tip our hats. That's important, too.
All right.
I agree.
Now we know more about the Quiet Skies program. Next time you're flying, there could be an air marshal watching somebody up in 3B. All right, Jim and David, thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.
Good to be with you.
6:29 here in New York City. In just a couple of hours, Paul Manafort's trial will start. But there's one thing you won't hear about at the trial, and that is collusion. Why? Judge Napolitano on that coming up next. Good morning, Judge. Plus, there's something fishy going on here. The brazen shark napping that has everybody talking this morning. But first, happy birthday to our friend, Dean Cain. The Lois and Clark star turns 52 years old today. He comes from Jersey. His name is Andrew Napolitano.
I didn't know that music was for me.
Yes.
God bless you. Good morning.
Good morning to you. All right, let's go out to the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Yes.
Paul Manafort, who was the president's campaign manager when he was running for president, is standing trial. But it's not for collusion. It's nothing about Russia. Or is it?
Well, there's a couple things to look for. It is nothing about Russia. And in fact, the government suffered a rare setback, because judges never say this, even though it's so obvious. So the judge says to the prosecutors, look, this has nothing to do with what Bob Mueller was appointed for. You just want to squeeze Manafort. That's the only reason he's in my courtroom. Now, everybody knows that happens, but rarely do judges, a Princeton graduate, this Judge T.S. Eliot, long before you and I were there, said that to the government, and it was sort of a brushback push to them. So he's going to be watching and making certain that this is just about the prosecution of Paul Manafort for financial misdeeds, basically laundering money and not paying taxes and lobbying for a foreign government without registering as an agent. Here's his defense. Well, first of all, Rudy Giuliani, and I've been critical of him because some of the things he said yesterday are so inconsistent with what he said before. But this he's going to do. He will have a team of lawyers in the courtroom to report immediately if anything is mentioned about Russia or about President Trump. Here's Manafort's defense. I was investigated for all this by the government 8 years ago, and I was exonerated. And I'm going to put on the witness stand as my first witness the young lawyer who exonerated me. Do you know who that young lawyer is? Rod Rosenstein.
What?
Yes, yes. So this is going to be quite a show if they succeed in getting Rosenstein, who's now runs
So why
the
was I
Justice
innocent
Department.
then and guilty now?
There you
Does
go.
he have something on the president? Is that what they're trying to say here?
We don't know. He has never been interviewed by a grand jury or by Bob Mueller's team. They expect that he does. He's been in solitary confinement. As soon as this trial's over, he's got another trial for a different set of financial crimes across the river in Washington, D.C. They're putting about as much pressure as the law allows them to, consistent with the Constitution.
Right. Amazing. But as the court filing itself says, the trial has absolutely nothing to do with collusion.
Correct. So there'll be so many, not just Giuliani's people, us, the media, will be watching every word that comes out. He was the campaign manager.
Had a lot of big, expensive cars and houses.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
All that happened before he was the campaign manager.
Absolutely,
But
Pete.
didn't he pay
Everything
taxes?
happened.
Is that right?
That's the allegation, that he laundered money, that he acquired money by some illicit means, sent it through a circuitous route, entered the U.S., and when the time it got here, it was a fraction of what it was over here, so that he only had to declare this very small amount. Second thing we're looking for is the key witness against him, and that's Rick Gates, because Gates was his business partner and was the number 2 person in the Trump campaign during the time that the meeting with the Russians occurred. Now, again, the prosecutors have assured Judge Ellis, you will not hear the word Russia. You will not hear the adjective Russian. We assure you there wouldn't, unless the defense brings it up, we assure you our witnesses will never raise it. That remains to be seen. We're talking about a 3 or 4 week trial, followed by another 3 or 4 week trial.
Well, if Rod Rosenstein is the leadoff witness,
oh my goodness,
he goes back. Yeah,
you could sell tickets.
Judge, thank you. Make it pay-per-view.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Where's Jillian? Is she here?
She's right behind you.
Are you ready to tell us the news, young lady?
Of course I am.
Look at the blue. Blue, 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 blue. We all got the memo this morning.
But only because you asked so nicely. So now I'll tell you the news. Is that cool?
You're terrific. I'm going to Philly tonight.
You are?
Yes.
All right, we're going to talk on the break. Hang around. In the meantime, let's get you caught up on some of your headlines, starting with this. Investigators will provide an update today on the frantic search for a missing University of Iowa student. More than 200 people have been questioned since Molly Tibbetts disappeared. The 20-year-old was last heard from on July 18th after returning to her boyfriend's house from a jog. He was out of town at the time and called police the next day when she didn't show up for work. Her father and her brothers will join us live in the next hour, so stay tuned for that. A University of Georgia dean caves to critics and apologizes for supporting a GOP gubernatorial candidate. According to Campus Reform, Charles Davis tweeted congratulations to Brian Kemp on his win, saying they knew each other as kids and he was a, quote, nice guy. The comments sparking accusations of racism and privilege from Kemp's critics online. 3 days later, Davis apologized, saying his tweet was, quote, ill-timed and poorly written. Do you remember this? A New Jersey cemetery accused of trashing dozens of American flags left at the graves of loved ones. Well, they're under fire again. A woman finding the flags from her fallen firefighter brother's grave thrown out on a trailer in the back of Lakeview Cemetery. She says the cemetery told her that the flags had to be removed to mow the lawn, but she claims it's the first time this has been a problem in over 3 years. A group of thieves are in a sea of trouble after wheeling a shark out of an aquarium in a baby stroller. The heist caught on camera in San Antonio, Texas. Police say one man snatched Miss Helen right out of her tank, while another wrapped the 16-inch horned shark in a blanket and stuffed it in a stroller. At least one man is facing charges after confessing to police. Miss Helen, now back home, was greeted by cheers from the aquarium staff. Send it to you guys.
Why do you steal a shark?
That's the big question.
It was pretty. Did you see? I'm sure.
Yeah, you want it in your fish
People
tank.
have, but aquariums.
Don't steal it from
It was
an
a pretty.
aquarium.
I agree.
What, they named her Miss Helen? Mm-hmm. She's back home now.
What's that in your baby stroller?
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
All right.
Weird looking
She'll
baby.
bite you.
Meanwhile, outside, Janice
bite
Dean, the weather machine, is with our college associate Rebecca, and it's her final day, and she's doing the weather.
All right.
Yay, Rebecca, how was it? How's it been so far?
Interning here has been such an amazing experience, and I'm so thankful that I got to meet all the awesome people behind Fox & Friends.
Very nice, and we didn't even work on that script. First of all, I want to say hi to this family from Indiana. What are your names?
Deanna Young
John.
And?
Morgan.
And?
Roger.
Are you ready to see Rebecca's debut?
We are. You'll do awesome.
Okay, your cheering section is here, Rebecca. Are you ready?
Thank you so much for coming out.
Here we go.
All right, hot, dry weather continues across the West this week. Heat advisories are posted for the Northwest, and the opposite is happening over the East Coast with more rain and flooding concerns. That's a look at your weather. Back to you, Steve, Ainsley, and Pete.
Oh my gosh! What did she do? How did she do? Awesome! Yay! Oh my gosh! Okay, so can I be off for the rest of the work week?
I mean, if you want to be.
Okay, bye everybody!
Good job, Rebecca.
Rebecca,
Great job, Rebecca. We wish you all the best.
Rebecca's going back to
Syracuse.
school at Syracuse
Yeah.
very shortly. All right.
Great job.
All right. It is 20 minutes till the top of the hour. The Trump administration is warning about China building up its military and confronting our ships at sea. So how big of a threat is this? We're going to break it all down for you.
Absolutely. Plus, LeBron James putting the full court press on President Trump.
He's kind of used sport to kind of divide us, and that's something that I can't relate to.
And LeBron, he was just getting warmed up. We'll bring you the rest of that.
Good morning to you and welcome back. Time for some quick headlines. More than 460 people ordered to give up their guns in Florida. It comes months after a new law took effect, temporarily stripping the rights of gun owners if a judge finds them to be a threat. Police say they've taken away more than 200 firearms. The red flag law is in response to the Parkland school shooting. And 8 states are now suing the Trump administration to block the release of 3D gun blueprints online. They argue access to the blueprints would open the door for terrorists and other criminals to get their hands on deadly weapons. Last month, the State Department reversed its 2013 ruling banning a Texas company from making the plans public. Pete?
Jillian. Well, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo sounding the alarm over Chinese encroachment in the South China Sea.
The Trump administration has a clear vision for the Indo-Pacific in the 21st century. We want all nations to enjoy open access to seas and airways. We'll never seek domination in the Indo-Pacific, and we will oppose any country that does.
Many Americans have heard about the U.S.-China conflict, but why is it so important? China's military might. We break it all down in part 2 of our week-long series, China, Friend or Foe. Here to weigh in, former State Department press officer Morgan Ortagus. Morgan, thanks for being here this morning. So you hear this, the previous administration said they were going to pivot to Asia.
Right.
It was almost more of a rhetorical pivot than in reality. We hear all about Russia, but China is ascendant, not just economically, but militarily. First of all, why does that matter to us?
Well, you and I are talking about this all week, Pete, because, as I said yesterday, and I continue to say, this is the real generational challenge. This is what we need to, Obama said he wanted to pivot. We need to actually pivot. I think it's the most important thing that President Trump is going to do during his tenure president is to counter China. So why is the military so important? We haven't had a real peer-to-peer competitor since the end of the Cold War with the former Soviet Union, of course. So what we're seeing China do is dramatically expand their military in order to counter us. Now, Pete, they're not at the point militarily that they could go head-to-head with us. They know that. But that is the ambition. That is the short-term and the long-term plan for President Xi.
And we'll start with the bottom line up front. The Navy is particularly important for the Chinese. Right now, they've even got more attack subs, probably not as sophisticated per se, but they want to reach that parity or pass us because the seas really matter to them.
And it's an important thing. We'll get into this tomorrow when we talk about cyber, Pete, but everything that the Chinese do, they basically steal everything that we've done and then make their own ships, their own planes, their own weapons. So the majority of this is stolen plans to begin with, number one. Number two, why is Navy so important for China? Because freedom of the seas is the number one thing that the American Navy, we heard Pompeo talk about it yesterday. This is how you have freedom of access for trade. Freedom of seas is the most important thing. So we've seen for the past 10 years China building up islands in the South China Sea. They're trying to take land away from South Korea, islands away from India.
They said they never militarize it, right? Except the first thing they do is then militarize that island. So they're lying to us.
So I think this is getting a lot of us Navy people kind of excited because we've got a competitor again, you know, as it relates to the Asian Pacific arena. But their long-term goal with the Navy is to control that theater, Pete, and is also to keep us out. I mean, we have dozens of bases around the world. The Chinese only have one base in Djibouti, Africa, but they have ambitious plans for more. So this right now, America controls we make sure that there's freedom of navigation, freedom of seas. The Chinese want to stop that. They want it to be remake it in their image.
The Navy's slogan was once a global force for good because we were the only guarantors of that free navigation.
Absolutely.
China is certainly challenging that. Let's go briefly through these other ones as well. They've got a large military.
They do. This is actually in 1992 they had 3 million active, so their numbers of active duty are a little bit smaller. When you see, of course, they do have more people than us in active duty service, but we're talking about China's the population that's 4 times that of the United States. So when you compare population to population, and of course, as you and I know, we're an all-volunteer force, so that makes up.
And they're not anticipating a massive land war, so
they certainly don't want to mess with you, Army guys.
That's right. Amen. Modern tanks, they're behind, but again, building up their military.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the moral of the story of all of this is they're spending. It's funny because the president talks a lot about our NATO allies spending 2% of their GDP on their military. The Chinese are doing that. So again, as it relates to peer-to-peer competitors with the U.S., they're spending not as much as we are, but they're spending a significant amount of their GDP to counter us. Of course, one of the things we have to tackle is that they're stealing everything as well.
They're stealing a ton. They've got more aircraft as well. They're trying to get the 5th and 6th generation aircraft.
Yeah, I mean, the F-22.
We've dominated the skies forever, but that could change.
And we're going to continue, but again, the importance of this is to let people understand that the size and scope of the Chinese military is not what it was, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. They're aggressive, they're expanding, and they're stealing all the technology they can to get there.
They're stealing a ton of technology, and they believe in themselves. They have a Chinese dream that's very different than the American dream.
It's very expansionist.
Collectivism, absolutely. Morgan, thank you very much. Thanks. Our series continues tomorrow as we examine China's cyber security threat with Morgan Ortegas. Appreciate it. All right, well, just last week, President Trump warned Iran would suffer the consequences if it threatened America. Now he's willing to meet with Iran's president with no strings attached. Is this the same strategy that worked with North Korea? We'll answer that question. Plus, liberal Hollywood is gearing up for the midterms. Oh, goody.
We really need you to volunteer starting now.
I am not throwing away my opportunity to make my voice heard this November.
It's going to be the young people of this generation that will change the world.
We've seen that before, and it didn't work. Maybe it'll work this time. So as I said, how'd that work for Hillary in 2016? Not so great. They're hoping it'll work in 2018.
Now you can't what you want. Now you can't.
Before Nexium 24 Hour, Mark could only